Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to introduce myself. From Edwin Lindsay from CS Lifesciences. We're a quality regulatory clinical company from Miami. I've been involved with patient monitoring for 15 years, covering as a quality regulatory, bringing devices to the FDA, CE marking, etc. I'll let Shiva introduce herself now.
Hi, my name is Shiva Sharareh, and I'm CEO and founder of Rekovar. We're focusing today on babies that are born from addicted moms, and we're looking at the NICU, a non-invasive monitoring device, and I will talk about it later.
I'm Fabio Boi. I'm CTO and co-founder of Corticale, that is an Italian startup whose main purpose is to develop new generation of invasive BCI, so not for monitoring, of course, and also to, let's say, interconnect brain with external assistive devices. So, good morning, everybody.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ruben De Francisco, founder and CEO of Onera Health. We are a sleep diagnostics and monitoring company. We brought the first polysomnography, or PSG, which is the gold standard in sleep testing, to the patient's home in a way that's super comprehensive. Is the first single-use PSG system that can be applied by patients very easily at home by themselves. And it's brain, cardiac, respiratory monitoring. So very comprehensive, a lot of data, a lot of insights, and very excited to be here today.
Hi, my name is Caitlin Morse. I'm the CEO and co-founder of BrainSpace. We're working in brain pressure management, and we are helping the neuro ICU transition from monitoring and needing the nurse to intervene to a closed-loop automated platform.
Thank you. So we'll kick off. As I say, patient monitoring's developing over the years. It's developing fast, as we can see with the companies here. But Shiva, we'll start off with you with the future of monitoring and kind of the different hybrid models, home, hospital, the clinical grade, all the kind of challenges we see with the future monitoring. What do you see from that?
So I could start from how we started Rekovar. Basically, we were facing a challenge of these opioid addicted babies that are born in NICU. And we realized that these babies are connected to a lot of wires. It's very uncomfortable. And some of the wiring systems are just providing one or two monitoring elements. And it's not really looking at holistically at the symptoms of these babies and tracking them. So we talked to a lot of doctors and nurses and realized that initially we wanted to just build a wearable. And realized we can't just build a wearable, and these babies are going through a lot of different symptoms. So we put a video audio in connection with our device and realized even that is not enough. So we have to build a symptom tracking with AI and combined all of this to really go from a wearable into a complete system in the NICU. And when we talked more with doctors, we realized that basically in the next few years, these devices need to go home. So it needs to be clinically validated and very accurate. So we took that path, which is a very difficult path. It's not easy. But we want to build a first objective tool that can assess any babies in NICU and provide a symptom tracking element to them. So where I think it's going, it's starting from a very clinical in the hospital setting, and then that has to be clinically validated, even if it's non-invasive, and it's going to basically move to home. And that's where it's
Anybody else want to join them? Or your experience?
Well, just to echo that, I think as we go from within hospital walls into the patients' homes, what's really important is that we keep on keeping that comprehensiveness of the data sets, right? The richness that we have on all of that data, right? That we don't compromise. We say, hey, we're going to the home and just make everything very simple. Let's measure less data, right? Lower the quality. We shouldn't do that. We need to make sure that accuracy remains very high. Comprehensiveness remains very, very high, right? That we add all sort of additional value on top of that, but that we don't compromise on what we are getting in the hospital today, right? While going to the home.
I think we need to also not underestimate the additional burden we're now putting on the caregivers of whoever that person is, right? There's a lot of appeal of hospital at home from the perspective of the hospital and the health system, because right now the caregiving role is not quantified economically. And so as we make that transition, it's really important that not only are we providing the same level of medical care, but that we're also considering how do we do this in a way that's feasible for, assuming in a pediatric case that there are people to care for them, but not every adult has that. And so a lot of the conversation on hospital at home has to do more to pull in the caregiver community.
Yeah, if I may add on top of this, so we thought about non-invasive technologies. Of course, for invasive technologies, let's in the case of invasive BCI, that is the topic that you are trying to solve in Corticale. There's even more challenge because we know that most of the invasive technology that, for example, stereo EEG devices that are currently implanted are usually implanted for a very low amount of time, and they are usually, all these procedures are undergone in a hospital, and also the neuromonitoring that is done in order to, the case of epilepsy, understand where is the focus that you have to remove. It is not something that is taught at the beginning to be brought at home, bring it home. So I think that in case of invasive, especially in the case of invasive technologies, there is an entire new world that we have to explore in order to push forward this transition between hospital and at-home care, let's say. So this is a great challenge, let's say.
Yeah, agree. So that's something that's going to change quite a bit. I think when we talked about monitoring in the past, or like home monitoring technologies, it was always about just a few parameters, longitudinally, right? Very small amount of data. And everyone's talking about AI, right? To harness all of the value that we have from the data, we need a lot of data, right? We need very rich data sets on the patient, right? So that we can not just look very focused at things, but that we can generally extract a lot of information and value, whether invasive or non-invasive. Yeah.
Just want to add one more thing. On the wearable side, I think we're moving away from just monitoring one or two elements. You have to really build a wearable and a smart system, even to measure any more physiological, psychological, and behavior of that patient. So you have to look at it as wellness devices, but clinically validated.
So following on from this, we've mentioned various scenarios like home, invasive, hospital kind of, but throw in wellness and like how do we stay away from the wellness trap, but how do we link this to value and the reimbursement of the product? Because obviously we see, as Caitlin says there, you go to the home, is there value, is there cost, how are you going, who's going to pay for it? Where do you see this going? And I'll kick off with Ruben.
Yeah. So medtech is a really interesting space, right? Because so many actors need to win, right? You bring a new procedure forward, whether it's home, whether it's hospital, you need to make sure that everyone wins with it, right? So the patient, the provider, the physician, all the professional healthcare staff, your payers, everybody. So how do we make sure that the value, right, is the right value, right? So that's one point. And then the other one, how do we make sure that that procedure, that new technology fits really, really well with the workflows, right? How people are using it. That's it. All of a sudden, it doesn't mean a ton more work, right? But it actually means more productivity, more value, perhaps, for those patients and those doctors. So in essence, it boils down to that, right? Just making sure that the value of that innovation, in this case, patient monitoring, it's very clear. That's very strong evidence supporting it, right? That's the evidence that you need to create, not only for payers, but also for clinical adoption, right? So you need to prove that there is a very strong value. You're talking, Shiva, about the clinical validation, right? That's something that, as an example, we've also done. Large-scale study, 200 patients, side by side, right? All this really to prove, all right, so You go from the hospital to the home, you're not losing any value, right? It's as good as, right, as what you're used to get today. And in the future, we are able to show that even more value, right? That there's even more value to it when doing things remotely or via monitoring. Then the reimbursement, I believe, is going to be the right reimbursement level, right? With the right evidence, you can support adequate reimbursement for patient monitoring.
Anybody else want to join in?
So for our patient population, which is opioid dependent, right now a lot of the parents are Medicaid. So we've talked to the payers, and they're very interested into a clinically validated device that could go home with the patients. So that's our focus. You know, you start from the hospital, they pay for that. There was codes that are already for therapeutic and a diagnostic that we can currently use. But then after that, they're willing to build a new code for a monitoring device that's accurate, and it can go home.
Following on from that, we mentioned Medicaid. It's around the medtech challenges, the kind of data dealers. One of the examples I had when I first started working with one of the companies is Medicaid. We had a patient monitoring device that was going to the home. This was 2016, 17. When we got it to the home, they didn't have Wi-Fi or phone, and we're going, what do we do here? Pull it back. So that's an old challenge, I think. But what challenges do you see nowadays with regards to data security, cyber security, and all that? And I'll kick off with Caitlin because she's at the product in the market.
Sure. So I think when we talk about data, one of the first things we have to ask is, what is this data supposed to accomplish, right? And we're talking about clinical validation and what are the studies and what is the action we're expecting to take? And it's the same conversation whether you're in the hospital or you're in the home. Okay, now you can tell me something's happening. What am I doing with that, right? And in our case, we're doing everything we can to do that automatically and have that response. But if you need to contact someone, does the device know who to call, right? Does the app know who to notify? When you think about tech, SaaS startups traditionally, yes, it was doable. Yes, it was buildable. And the question was, should it be built? Could it make a business? And I think because traditionally medtech has been, yes, we know it's going to be valuable. Is it possible? Not, is it needed? When some of the wearables first came in, it was just a question of, hey, these sensors are now affordable. These batteries are now small enough. We can do this. And early on, there wasn't enough data around at what time frame do we need to intervene? Is this a days, weeks, sometime this quarter, we're going to change medication long term, or this is a, hey, go to the ER right now, right? And so there's been this real transition around when we have this data, how are we using it? And then similarly, what amount of it is getting transferred? So there's this tension between, on the one hand, Wi-Fi capabilities or even just internet in different parts of the country and different countries around the world, you're going to have different considerations. So if you're trying to stream very high fidelity data that's much better for your AI multimodal sets, that's going to require capabilities that may or may not exist, not only in the home, but even in some of the hospitals we're talking to have, we've all been there in a hospital trying to get a phone call. So I think there's really this question of how do we balance the volume of data that's useful for AI and for training with the volume of data that's needed for an emergency or immediate kind of response. And so when we think about that, it's really important in that architecture to really stratify what data do I need to deliver in what time frame, and what can happen async, what can happen at some point in the next, day or week versus what needs to happen right away. And then we've talked about, we actually, the first version of our system is not cloud connected. It connects to the patient monitor and uses the patient monitor to connect to the EHR because cybersecurity can be a real long timeline, right? You go into a hospital and even if you've got the back committee and everything else, IT now becomes another challenge. So even though long-term we expect to be cloud connected, I do think it's a consideration if you are in hospital on what that timing looks like. And that's something we've talked about a lot.
That's totally true, Kathleen. And especially considering that, let's say, what we are perceiving, let's say, also on our side with our technology is that in the next future, what we will have is that the volume of data will increase, let's say, in a quite noticeable way. Let's say, probably it's not a linear growth, but
Exponential,
probably. I just want to bring the example of our current technology, we are producing something like 300 megabits per second. So you can imagine that if you need to monitor a patient 24 hours per day, 7/7. So let's say we are talking about a terabyte of data. And I definitely agree with what you said right now, Kathleen. So there's the need of a stratification, let's say. So different time of the development, of the validation of your product, of your med device, requires probably a different kind of data treatment. So in the beginning, probably when you need to really understand which is the powerful and the richness inside your data to train your ML and AI model, you probably need to have a very large storage and probably Wi-Fi and let's say the idea to move the patients at home probably is not the right choice, and not now with the technology that we have. But probably at a certain point, once you, let's say, stabilize the model, you perform all the calibration on your device and you can think to move with your patient at home, probably, and this is something that Ruben just mentioned during the very first question, you need to extract and to extrapolate from the whole amount of data that your device is capable to collect, just some peculiar features that may be useful in different cases, let's say alarm on one side, maintenance on the other side, update on the other side. So there are many different aspects that should be, in my opinion, still well studied somehow, depending on the device that you are adopting. But there are many features and metrics that you need to know in order to guarantee that your device is fully functional and that, let's say, you don't have to recalibrate your device or there is something else that you need to take care of.
I think that question, though, of over time, we're just going to only keep a subset of the device is maybe missing the opportunity that medtech really has. Because how many of us have read a paper where it was a retrospective study and they're like, well, we couldn't include this part of the cohort because this wasn't in the EHR, or, well, this part was a partial subset for this reason, right? I think often when we're first going in on a first gen product, we don't actually know which data is going to be the most valuable. And when you look at the ability for, we are the ones physically interacting with the body, right? If you have a physical device in medtech, you have an opportunity to develop rich data sets. And so from an edge computing perspective, from the growth we're seeing with LLMs, the cost is really coming down for that storage. And I think we just shouldn't be too quick to dismiss data that today may not be useful, because you need to build much larger data sets to sometimes really understand what is possible. And so we're really looking at how do you continue to build these larger and larger data sets. Everyone throws around the term digital twin, but how are you really getting there if you're only saving the subset of data that you need to treat this particular patient?
So what we have done in our company is developed a whole ecosystem around it. So we get the data, raw data, structured, unstructured, and we filter what we need. We put segments of 15 seconds and we analyze and annotate the data, but we keep all the data. We have to continuously every second look at the baby visually, look at the sound, look at the sensors, integrate all of that together. So we're also learning how much data we really need and how much data we should keep. And so our first clinical trial, we did 35 patients. So we've just accumulated 1 million clips right now that's been annotated, but I'm sure there's a lot more that we're going to learn from the data that we've captured and validated with the physicians.
I kind of think that all of you guys are right in a way, because I mean, what's a rich data set and a large data set? It's a matter of perspective, right? I think we're coming from a world where data was quite limited, in my view, in my perspective, that we are collecting medically on the patient, right? Mm-hmm. Sleep studies, we are looking at hundreds of megabytes, gigabytes, you talk terabytes, right? It's crazy, right? I mean, and technology has to kind of follow, right? So you're very hungry to make sure that we'll have, very high speed data, large storage, very efficient. I think there's a time for all of these things. I think what's really interesting is that this is a medtech panel, right? It's not about devices, actually. It's about data, right? In the end of the day is all about data. We need to strike the right balance. We need a lot of data to create the right algorithms, right, the right models, because in the end it's insights, right? It's patient insights that we need to deliver. And at the same time, if you think short term to mid term, there is a trade-off there to be made where sometimes, maybe you need to run some AI on your device and some AI in your cloud, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people are just running all the AI just in the cloud these days or on a server somewhere. But in fact, I think we may need for certain applications like you guys have like real-time stuff going on, right? You may have to run a lot of your AI just right on the edge, right?
And at the end of the day, it comes back to how does that actually change treatment for the patient, right? And so that's where the more that we can have that clinically robust, what is the protocol? How does care change for this patient when we have that information? And that's you guys have both spoken well to that whole question of the clinical validation beyond the data itself.
And another point is also interoperability of data. So let's say, how can I make this data? Because maybe the data are so many that maybe a single company does not have the chance to analyze all of them in all the details and all the features that are contained into the raw data. And so might be prospectively, even though we are a company, we are not a research center. So, but in any case, data are, if we want to see it in a from a philanthropic point of view, are data of the humanity, and let's say someone else can get from my own data some specific feature that might be helpful for another patient categories or for another pathology, let's say, that maybe I'm not currently looking at. And so another point is data format, data protocols, and interoperability of the data. So this is another point that is not just a problem of the medtech, it's a problem of, in our case, neurotech, the data in general, also on the research side, for example. And what we are noticing is that there is a huge push towards adopting, let's say, standardized data from any kind, coming from, let's say, behavioral data, genomic data, electrophysiological data, sleep data, whatever, into unique format that can be affordable and readable from anyone on the hearts. So, and this is another crucial point, in my opinion, if we talk about data.
Well, and then just think about how much clinicians are now overwhelmed with the amount of additional information, right? And so that's part of why we're looking at automation and closed loop and what we can do. It's why you're taking all of that and simplifying it down to, okay, what's the action to be taken? Because we do have to recognize that the amount of information we're expecting clinicians to be able to act on is growing in an incredible pace. And that just is a huge burden for clinicians if we don't think about how do we actually take the burden off of them instead of adding to it.
So it's like looking at this. A nurse today, when you go to like an emergency room, to NICU or ICU, they come in and ask you a lot of questions. They connect you to a temperature monitor, blood pressure monitor. They actually measure your pulse oximeter. They look and see if you have any respiration issue. They're all done with different instruments. What we think future is going to be, that nurse is going to have a tool that basically provides all that feedback while she's using her time to actually assess and do other things that are more important. So that's where I think the next generation devices would be.
So following on again from there, because you mentioned about data and informing the clinicians with given data for them to make informed decisions. When it comes to the algorithms, liability, and who owns that, where do we see that going now? Because we're providing them with all this data, and we're giving them algorithms, AI, to help them make informed decisions. But where does the algorithm, the liability, fall then?
So we currently have an iPad that is our device, the wearable device, the electronics, we own them. We go to the hospital and they have their system, but we're actually collecting all the data in our iPad. We own our data.
Right. Yeah, let's say that's a very good point, because, and I think that is a problem that is not just about medtech. Of course, medtech is even more crucial, but just think about the automated cars, the self-driving cars. They are, in the end, they are taking decisions in your place that can kill you at a certain point. So, and so
We give the ticket to.
and this is the point. And so it's really, this is something I think totally new, because while before have all the algorithms that we implemented into medical devices usually are just, let's say, predictive. You really know where the algorithm goes. Yeah. Indeed, with AI, it's a radical different problem. So it can evolve based on the training that you have done. So it's really update dependent, let's say, somehow. It really depends on the data set that you provide to the AI algorithms. And it takes decision based on something that you don't know till the end. You don't know which is the internal connection of an ML algorithm or whatever, and so the reliability becomes a huge problem. I personally think that at a certain point, also with the, let's say, with the increase of medical device that will take advantage of AI algorithm, at a certain point, these kind of liability problems related to the decision of AI-based algorithm would be somehow regulated, and probably we will arrive to a shared liability, let's say, between the hospital, the company that provides medical device and the algorithms, the insurances. So let's say it's something really tricky. Let's say it's not easy to really understand which will be the future. But I really think that with a very wide adoption at a certain point, this will be somehow regulated.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, just wanted to add. Yeah, it also depends what you are doing with that data, right? So I think so far, most of the algorithms are more doing decision support, right? Rather, making the last decision. It empowers the physician to do maybe better decisions or quicker decisions, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's, I think short and midterm is also safe a place to operate, where we're figuring out all these liability questions, and my lawyer is not in the room, so I'm going to be super careful.
Watch it later.
I know.
All right. Yeah, so I think that's a main thing. And then in terms of the ownership, I know it's always a bit of a, who owns the data. Everybody wants to own the data. But in essence, as we were just talking about, it's about, being able to deliver those insights and being able to access that data or control that data, making sure that you can build a lot of value on that data, right? So as long as we as companies, we make sure that we are able to access, have the right rights to access that data to deliver value back to the physicians, back to the patient, right? Then maybe that's not the question, right? The question is, how do we make sure that we build a lot of value on data? And I think all of us are collecting huge amounts of data, which we know we're gonna harness and we're gonna get a lot of value out. And how do we make sure that we can keep on building insights on top of that data going forward?
So every time I'm at a neuro conference, I go to any workshop that there is around integrating, used to be machine learning, now AI, right? And the number one thing I hear from neurosurgeons and intensivists every time is explainability. And so to your point of, well, we don't really know how the AI made that decision, I don't personally believe that medical professionals will adopt technology that they can't understand. Mm-hmm. And what I actually think we see with LLMs is, I don't know about you guys, mine has learned that it has to provide sources every single time. I don't trust it, right? I'm always like, provide the sources, prove the evidence. And where I think we actually should expect it to go is similar to the relationship between a senior and junior doctor, right? So when an attending's training a resident, they're like, okay, what's the decision? What's your basis of that decision? What's a differential for that decision? And I think that's actually where we're going to see a similar kind of adoption of being able to say, here's the recommendation, here's the primary evidence that we're leaning on, here's the other things we considered. And I don't know if any of you, there was a recent change with ChatGPT where it'll now show you like checking this location and checking this type of source. And that's how we need to be thinking about this, I believe, for medical professionals to be able to say, we're considering these elements. Now, we're not necessarily going to be able to say, okay, it's 12% this and 17% that, right? But being able to say, here's the range of things that were considered, here's the parameters that were most relevant. But I do believe that most clinicians I talk with, at least, want to have these tools, but they're not willing to rely on them as long as they're still holding all the liability without the explainability.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really what it comes down to.
So, just a very last thing about that. I definitely agree on that. But the point that we need to consider is that if the information coming from the algorithms is just a suggestion for the clinician, let's say, and so I definitely agree with you. You need to explain me why you are telling me this, why this can be dangerous, why there is this alarm, and so on and so forth. A different thing is that instead your device, based on ML model or whatever, takes a decision that is, let's say, in as a consequence of, let's say, the reasoning behind the algorithm. So let's take, for example, what we're doing with the BCI device. A BCI device record the data, the ML algorithm analyze the data, and the output is, okay, I control something external. And there's no clinician that is saying, okay, tell me the reasoning why you asked to switch on the light. I don't know, I'm just...
So maybe not in that moment, but if you think about an M&M, so when something goes wrong in surgery, a group of doctors get together and say, what went wrong and how do we do differently? When we have closed loop, if there's an issue and they're like, well, that's not what I expected to happen with the patient, we're going to have that same question, right? They're going to say, well, why did you make that change? Well, why did you do it in that way? And so whether it's real-time explainability for clinical support or whether it's being able to do a retrospective and say what decisions were taken and why, I don't think we're going to be able to fully get away from this idea of simply saying that's what AI thought was best is probably not going to cut it. But I hear what you're saying, that the clinician may not have a chance in that moment.
Exactly. And here we come back to what we mentioned before. So data availability. So how can I get, if my ML model or whatever is performing actually as I expect, if I don't have the data that I can, let's say, analyze manually, let's say by myself in retrospection, let's say. And so this is why also data, especially in the very first stage of a new kind of technology that you are delivering, are so crucial, let's say, right, to validate your algorithm.
Exactly. I think it goes back also again to the clinical evidence, right? If you've proven, in a clinical trial that the algorithm is able to work really, really well, right? Like you take a data set, you have physicians analyzing manually the data, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 5 of them, and you have the AI, and you prove that, on a large data set of patients, on the right population that you're looking at, the algorithm is doing really well, right? That also provides a lot of confidence, because the reality is sometimes you don't know what the neural network is doing, right? It's identifying all sort of features, but now try to explain each of the features. Just know you got it right, because it's a huge amount of data, because machine learning models have been evolving, right, so rapidly in the last years. And I'm talking about the more traditional machine learning, right? Not particularly more Gen AI and LLMs, but really, taking time series of data, a lot of data, and having the algorithm do the magic on a very good training data set, because you need very, very good data. Otherwise, it's not going to work. But you have very, very good data. It just works. And the way to prove that it provides confidence is actually looking at the output. You cannot explain all of these steps very often, but just you look at the output, and it goes back to, strong clinical evidence.
So, as we've probably guessed, we're overrun with questions. We've got probably time for one more question, just because we could probably talk for hours on this. One of the areas I see in the industry it's probably underlooked at is pediatrics. But when you've talked here about risks and about patient monitoring, investors might start to get nervous because it's pediatrics and it's not a good thing if something goes wrong. How do you see this with patient monitoring and going into the new frontier?
So how we are looking at it is you got to build a very good intelligence system that is not alarming all the time. And because right now you're moving from the hospital to home, so you have caregivers, parents that can't make medical decisions, and you're relying on your AI, machine learning, to predict some of these values and alarm systems. So you got to really build an intelligent system that is user-friendly. And basically, your patient is the pediatrics. Under 18, they can't make clinical decisions. So you have to be able to make sure that they are not doing that. So we look at this as a holistic way, as what we're building in the hospital versus what is going to go home is going to have to be very different.
Anybody else get some inputs into that?
Well, I think everybody loves pediatrics, but yes, sometimes indeed, and you look at market sizes and things like that, right? You look at the business case, it's tricky, right? I mean, if you look as a whole, pediatrics is great. You look at as a certain specialty, like, okay, what the pediatric market looks like, the portion is 10% of the adults or 20%. Sometimes it's a bit difficult, but I think it's great to make those, pediatric, more focused technologies more available in the home. I think it could be a much bigger market actually than it is. Mm-hmm. I think very often we don't want to bring kids to the hospital because of the burden, if it can be avoided, and there are also shortcuts that are taken, right? So we see, I think about tonsillectomies, for instance, right? So kids need to have the tonsils removed or the adenoids removed, and they should do a test. And very often they don't even do the test, right? Or a sleep study. They just, go directly for surgery, right? It's just going to be better. Otherwise, you need to bring the kid to the hospital twice. So I'm sure we would be able to make much better decisions in pediatrics. It will do more measurement and will make it more available, less burdensome, less invasive and intrusive, right? I think from a market perspective, if the kid is doing the test, then maybe the parents will be doing the test or the study, right? So I do think it can be a bit of a flywheel effect. So I really like pediatrics. I think it's a huge opportunity. Yes. Remote monitoring, patient monitoring, yeah.
In our case, the same device is used in both pediatrics and adults, which is how we get around the market size consideration. And we actually believe that you're going to have much better understanding of the brain if you can actually see a growing and developing brain. So in our case, there are patients that are 10 that will be using once it is FDA cleared, which it is currently not, and all the way through to dementia and patients that are in their 90s. And so in our case, it's actually the fact that patients can be more mobile that has a lot of that pediatric appeal, but we're in the hospital, so it's a little different than if you're sending a pediatric patient home.
Yeah, maybe if I may add on this one, let's say for invasive technology, the pediatric field, kids, let's say it's a very sensitive argument touch, let's say. And also there's some technicalities that you have to solve when you talk about the invasive devices, especially the one that we developed, so that you need to stick into the brain. So we're talking about something that, first of all, is quite scary. And they can get the parents that can say, okay, maybe we can wait so we can see if there's something else. And the second point is also the fact that the brain, especially when you have very young kids, is not still completely formed until undergone this kind of patients to this kind of surgeries and adopt this kind of technology might be quite hard, in my view, let's say. But let's say there are some kids that probably will need it, unfortunately, I would say. For sure is not the very first market, at least in our case, that we are looking at. It's very, very complicated, let's say.
And that's good timing. 10 seconds to go. Thank you very much. And that's the end of it. Thank you.
Right.
Ruben, let's